A charger can be online, well located, and still fail commercially. Uptime establishes operational values, but utilization determines whether the business actually works. In this episode, I'm joined by Loren McDonald. We dig into what truly drives utilization, and it goes beyond location. We examine how pricing, retail partnerships, customer experience, amenities, and brand visibility are going to be the competitive weapons. The next phase of charging won't be won by whoever deploys the most hardware. It will be won by whoever pulls in the EV driver. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency. The Field Frequency podcast is brought to us by Field Advantage. Field Advantage is a national field services organization supporting EV charging infrastructure across the United States. Today, I'm very happy to have Loren McDonald, founder of Chargeonomics, with us today. Loren has spent years analyzing EV adoption, charger utilization, the NEVI program, the competitive forces shaping our ever-changing charging market. Loren, so glad to have you on Field Frequency.
Yeah. No, it's great to be on, and we'll probably get into this, but you and I actually sort of go way back, and you were one of my, I think you were my second customer back when I was tracking the NEVI program, and you actually helped me sort of formulate that and stuff. So I appreciate that, and we had some good times down at the Field Advantage headquarters. You and the team turned me on to bourbon. I was never a bourbon drinker, and so I left that evening there with a new appreciation for bourbon. So I thank you for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guarantee at your next visit to campus, you will find probably bottles there in the lodging area, I'm sure.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Well, we've wanted to have you on Field Frequency for some time now, and finally schedules aligned and it all came together. Of course, certainly want to get you back beyond this episode. But for the audience, I'd like to dive into what you've been doing in the space. Like you said, from tracking the NEVI program, the EV adoption database, up to where you're at today. You've done a lot in the space, of course. Well recognized, well known in our industry as well. But let's talk about the pathway through EV adoption, the NEVI program. Even share your time as chief analyst at Perrin, and then talk to us about what you're building at Chargeonomics.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, it's and I did a post on LinkedIn about this the other day. But I ever since I was a little kid, even before EVs were kind of a thing, I knew that the future was going to be electric vehicles. So it was just kind of in my DNA that I just always knew in my heart and gut that electric vehicles were going to be the future. I'm not quite sure how I knew it, but I just did. And I almost got a GM EV1 back in 96, I think it was, but I didn't qualify for the lease or something like that. So I didn't get one. And I applied for a job in 1994 with US Electric Car, which was out here in California, one of the first. They actually they took existing cars, like I think the GM Prism car, and they basically retrofitted it with an electric powertrain and stuff. And I tried to get a job there and didn't, which is a good thing because they ended up not doing so well. They haven't been around for a long time. But the point being is that I was always fascinated by the transition and to electrification and stuff. And so I had a 35-year career in marketing, but back in it was about 2013. I actually tried to get a Tesla Model S back then. I had the contract done except for the signature, but then my wife was doing basically carpooling for like 4 teenage girls, and she said, "No sedan, we need an SUV." And so that delayed our first EV about 3 years and stuff. But I started about then. I started a blog writing about solar and product and recycling and water and EVs and like everything. And after a couple of years, one day I woke up and did some reflection and said, I'm just like, an inch deep and a mile wide on all these sort of sustainability things. And I said, I need to focus on something. And it was down to 2 things, either water, because living here in California, we're always having water issues and stuff, or EVs. That was sort of my choice. It's like turn left, turn right. And I thought that electric vehicles had a more interesting sort of behavioral economics sort of, underpinning and question. Like, what is it going to take to get Americans, those road trip loving, truck driving people to adopt EVs? And, 15 years later, we're starting to see, nothing, right? They're adopting it. But it was really that. And so in 2017, I launched EV adoption, a blog and my business and stuff. And then was doing a lot of forecasting and tracking EV sales and charging and everything like that. And then when the NEVI program came around, it was literally I woke up one Saturday and said I should build a database to track NEVI and did and talked to people like you, gave me a lot of feedback, and that program really kind of I was already sort of on the map, but that program really sort of took my personal brand and awareness to another level, and got a lot of clients and built sort of a platform around that, did hundreds of media interviews, program and things like that. And then ultimately that led to Perrin, acquiring my business and hiring me as chief analyst. And that was really sort of exciting and fun because working with Bill Farrow and the amazing data that Perrin has, we always used to joke that I was like a kid in a candy shop, right? Like taking this data and trying to make sense of it and understand the trends of the industry. And I left after a year for a variety of reasons, but one of them was just sort of health and wanting to cut back on the hour. I was working at a startup, and I've worked at many startups, and it was a lot of hours, right? Mostly my fault. But I wanted to sort of cut back. Anybody can look at my face, see I'm not a youngster, and so it was. I wanted to have a little bit more control over my time. But after I left, I took some time, Jason, to kind of just sort of reflect. And I was in like sort of no hurry. And what I realized is that I'd spent, as I mentioned, 35 years in marketing. So I had this background in marketing and consulting and understanding data and trends and stuff. And 10, 15 years analyzing what was going on in EVs and EV charging. And what I realized was I should marry my marketing background and sort of my EV knowledge and data and stuff. Because what I realized is that the charging industry seems to be overly focused on everything up to the ribbon cutting, right? Like my LinkedIn feed, and I know you see this as well. It's just every day there's like a ribbon cutting and all these politicians and the vendors and everybody show up and stuff. But it's like, that's when the hard work really starts. Yes, I know there's a lot of hard work and, utility negotiation and trenching and contracts and all this stuff. But where the rubber meets the road, or where the driver meets the charger, right, is how do you acquire and retain customers? And marketing, right? And how to build a great customer experience. So it was this intersection of customers and CX, right? And marketing and things. And how do you build this? And when I started looking in at the data, the parent utilization data, quite candidly, and we'll get into this, it was not pretty. And that just sort of confirmed, okay, this industry really needs help understanding. They're so focused on hardware and maintenance and the utilities and all this kind of stuff, but very few are focused on actually how do we grow and retain customer base and deliver a stellar customer experience. So that was a long setup, but that's really kind of brings us up to where I am literally today, right? That is just my sort of now super sort of razor focus is on that aspect.
So to that end, thanks for that background, because from those, I mean, we're all connected in the world of LinkedIn, but to be able to hear the story and the trajectory is important. Let's double click on Chargeonomics. Like, what is that convergence of all these things that you've mentioned? What is taking shape through the building of Chargeonomics, and what is the output
exactly.
to the market?
A lot of it is sort of continuing, if you will, what I've been doing. It's all about the data, right? Yeah. It's all about tracking and understanding the data and converting that into sort of trends and meaning and insights. And as I mentioned, I'm still tracking like EV sales and trends that are going on, which EVs have, NACS connectors and what power level they have. I'm sort of tracking all things EV because those things affect sort of demand for charging and the type of charging and where and all those types of things. But as I mentioned, it's been sort of progression the last. It's hard to believe it's almost been a year since I've left Parent. It's been 11 months, but it's allowed me, and working with a lot of different companies and partners and things like that, of really focusing in more on this, answering this question of, now that you have the station open, right? How do you actually create success? How do you actually grow sessions and utilization and build brand and loyalty and a customer experience? And so that's really sort of the focus now, and a lot of that is again using data from companies like Parent to understand what's going on in a competitive market and help companies understand what's realistic for them, like where things going, and then how they improve that, right? What steps they need to take to grow those sessions and utilization.
Yeah. Going back to your comments about post ribbon cutting,
right?
Now the site's active, differentiations, feature sets, amenities, et cetera. Because obviously the ROI is going to be driven by that utilization. Utilization is being driven by those that select that as the charging station. So reflecting on some recent events. So within the month of July, I found myself at a Tesla charging station in El Paso, Texas. The shaded area was 105, 106 degrees in the shade.
Yeah.
So there I am at a charging station, and using the charger, it's just barreling down on us. That Texas El Paso heat, El Paso, Texas heat and sun, no shade, no canopy, et cetera. Then fast forward at the end of this month, or at the end of July rather, I'm at Power Up America, a new CPO, emerging market. And we're out there at that ribbon cutting. There's a canopy over us. Yeah. And, certainly different climates from that side in Kentucky to, El Paso, Texas desert area. It was notable. And so as an EV driver myself, I'm looking at those amenities. That's important to me. Yep. That is important to me. I can sit under a canopy with the AC running and stay cool. Sitting in that sun at that charging station with no canopy, it didn't matter. Full blast. We were sweating. We were hot. Yeah. And so that differentiation, you look at like Walmart. Walmart is an example of someone entering the DC fast charging market in a really big way.
Really big way. Yeah.
I mean, look at the amount of growth that they've had and the amount of time. And we know they originally partnered with Electrify America, allowed the easement onto their property, EA operating on their site. But they built their own network, and they're 80 stations across.
Yeah, there were 80. I think they're opening a couple a week now, I think. So, they'll be at 100 stations here, probably by the time this podcast airs, right?
Yeah. So, let's talk about that differentiation. Maybe in this case, it's a matter or a question of pricing, pricing that they're offering to Walmart Plus customers, or membership discounts. What is an operator like Walmart? What does scale for them look like, and expansion mean, and what's the impact on the driver?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there, but with Walmart specifically, I think one of the things we're seeing, and we saw it with an announcement from EVgo a few days ago, where they partnered with a shopping center developer to open. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it was 300 locations in the next several years, something like that. Pretty significant. And I think what companies like Walmart and now Costco and a lot of these different companies that are getting to the space is there's this pivot from CPOs going, where's the best location to put a charger to, and then what amenities and everything do we add to, actually who do we partner with that already has the customer and all of the amenities and things, whether it's shopping, eating, dining, whatever it is, to do while they charge. In other words, and maybe we'll talk more about this later, but it's this concept I call, charging habit stacking, right? Of where you're already doing things, and it's, oh, by the way, I'm going to be parked for 20 minutes or 9 hours, right? And so I can charge, I can plug in. And Walmart, I know you were there in the 2025 at the EV Charging Summit in Vegas, and Walmart was on the keynote panel. And they clearly understood this. And the speaker talked about, people typically come into a Walmart for like 40 minutes, and that's just about exact amount of time, a lot of the cars take to fully charge or whatever. And that's really the key, Jason, right? Is that the smart people in the industry are understanding that, it's all about the customer, right? How do you get the customer? If you don't have the customer, your charging station doesn't matter, right? And we're seeing too many stations that have, 1, 2, 3, 4% utilization, right? And if you want to be successful, you got to get, 15, 20% or whatever, most likely. And that's what, these retailers like Walmart understand. They have in their case, they have massive expertise and understanding in energy. They have, relationships with utilities. A lot of their stores and warehouses have massive solar deployments and stuff. So they understand the energy side, they understand retail, and they learned, I'm sure, from partnering with Electrify America for several years. And then it was like, okay, now we know we got this, right? And so our value proposition is, you know us, you trust us, you're already shopping with us. By the way, why don't you plug in and charge when you're with us, right? And it gives people another reason to go there, but also you're not changing, you're not going, where am I going to charge on my road trip or day on the way home from work or whatever. It's just like, oh, I'm going to go shop at Walmart and plug in. It just becomes this habit stacking idea. And so I think that's one of the biggest ahas. I don't think everybody fully understands it yet, but I think they're starting to. And I think, a lot of the announcements we've seen lately, and even with Ionna, I know you had Seth Cutler on a while back. And, what did they do, Jason? They started out with all these big, greenfield charging stations with lounges and canopies and all this kind of stuff. Like, as you know, really expensive stations. And then what did they start doing? They started partnering with Sheetz, APs, and I think Wawa as well. And then the big one was Circle K, where they basically are taking over Circle K's charging business, right? And they're actually ripping and replacing a lot of the existing infrastructure. And, and so think about that, right? What is convenience store chain? They have the parking lot. They probably have the power and enough power, maybe not in every case. So you don't locate there, right? But they have canopies at a lot of them. They have bathrooms. They have food. They have beverages, right? In some cases, they have gourmet food and, like great, like fried chicken sandwiches or homemade type ice cream. Like a lot of these new these sort of convenience store 2.0 convenience stores, they're not like your grandfather's convenience store, right? Like they're like, some of them serve sushi and things like that, right? It's a different experience. And maybe they have tables and chairs and Wi-Fi and stuff. So, then it's just the question for a CPO like Ionna is, is there enough room in the parking lot to replace? And that's always, as you know, a tough conversation, right? Because those parking spaces at many convenience stores are few and far to come by, right? And so it's do we have enough room to sort of put that in? But basically, the equation changes, Jason. Instead of like, okay, we've got to add awnings and lounges and bathrooms and food and all this kind of stuff. It's like, we can just focus on our core competency, which is building a great charging experience and take advantage of that partnership with the retailer. So I think that's, one massive trend that we're going to start to see. And then Walmart, back to Walmart on sort of like the pricing, when they first announced this a couple years ago, one of the things they talked about was, kind of their low price. I forget what their slogan is, low price every day or something like that, right? As you can tell, I'm not a frequent Walmart shopper, but they have that scale and ability because they also have two sources of revenue, right? They're not relying on the charging revenue. The real margin business is getting the people out of the car and in the store, and then spending, $173 on clothes and food and everything else, right? And so I think that mix is going to be one of the other sort of big changes. and maybe it's the charging 3.0 change is, as we saw with gas stations, right? When gas stations started out, they were like a single pump and it was just selling gas. Maybe it was next to a store or something. But, when I was growing up, like in the 60s, you took your car to the local gas station to be serviced.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They were called service stations in like the 60s and 70s and stuff. And then what happened? They morphed to become, I know it's I was talking to somebody yesterday. It's different on the East Coast. There still are a lot of convenience stores with service bays. Out here in the Californian stuff, there's very few.
Yeah.
They morphed into becoming convenience stores that, oh, by the way, we have a bunch of gas pumps out front, right? And if you step back and think about the evolution of the charging business, particularly the fast charging business, it's probably going to see a similar trajectory where its role and model and business model and stuff changes over time, and that ultimately people are going to realize, well, the real opportunity is the retail revenue, and the refueling part is just what gets them in the door, hopefully gets them in the door. And what we really want is that add-on revenue, right? I mean, we're always going to see probably just standalone charging stations, but that's going to work in some places, but not in others. And I think that real model is that more sophisticated combination of all those, amenities, retail, and additional revenue opportunities.
Yeah. And, you mentioned Ionna. They're an example of an operator who has different, I'll call it different products. They got the rechargeries, they got in different scaled sites and different sets of amenities, and, baseline amenities, baseline charger, baseline charging output, baseline pricing for the, per kilowatt, but the on-site configurations are different. We see that on the petroleum retailer side, to your earlier point of, I remember as a kid, you pulled up to the gas station and someone filled your vehicle and they checked your oil, and it was a service station model.
Wow.
You
think about that, right?
Yeah,
think about that, right?
Yeah, you stayed in the car.
Me to check your oil, clean your windshield.
windshield.
My God, I've forgotten about that, right?
Yeah. Because I remember just that as a kid, just sitting in the back seat, and that's what's happening around us and happening to us as we pulled up to the service station to refuel, and then of course things
your tire
evolved.
Looks a little low. You want me to add some air, like service? Wow.
Yes, and so
then we added the self, right?
Yeah. Then self-serving, and then of course, and then eventually we evolved into paying. You didn't even have to go inside the store. Now you're paying at the pump. There's a transaction opportunity there, and then of course the retailers back then were all freaking out. No, we want them to come in store. That's where our higher margin profiles are. If they can pay at the pump, they won't come in the store. That didn't change. They continue to go in the store, and then of course things have evolved, and so now, like the operators you mentioned, the Sheetz and the Wawas and the Buc-ee's of the world, who have a destination, and so charging is a natural bolt on. And going to your comments about the habit stacking, I don't really think about charging. Charging I make charging convenient to me, not something I have to do. I'm going to charge either, right now in my driveway, my Leaf is charging, but if I'm out in the market or traveling beyond the range of my battery, I'm going to be looking to pull off and charge somewhere in the public domain. But, the CPO of yesterday, the CPO of today, and the CPO of tomorrow will by nature all look different. They have to look different. But what does the CPO of tomorrow look like? And it goes back to your comments around differentiation and the partnerships, like you mentioned, Electrify America and Walmart were partnered at a time. Now Walmart is coming to market with its own charging network and still leveraging the on-site amenities that attracted EA in the first place. But now it's an expansion of the customer opportunity that Walmart has, because, like you said, 40 minutes. I remember some data, and it's maybe getting close to a decade old, around Target and their review of sites with level 2 chargers and the difference in the basket stack for the EV driver versus the non-EV driver. And, you think about it, you drive, especially on a level 2 charger, you're going to be a little bit more intentional as you're pushing the basket through the store. Do we need toothpaste? Do we need toilet paper? What do we need? What do we need while we're here?
We got plenty of time. Yeah.
But differentiation, that's where it gets into it. And so, you mentioned, tracking OEMs with NACS ports. The charging industry and automakers have standardized on, or standardized around, for the most part, the NACS connector. And you're seeing BEV models come to market with the NACS port on it. But then you also have major CPOs like the ones we've already talked about, Ionna and Walmart, Mercedes-Benz, et cetera. And they're deploying a mix of charging protocols, the CCS and the NACS, and, to kind of bring in everyone. Talking about differentiation, talking about, the experience, the charging experience. As a charging industry, do you think we're moving closer to NACS and we're going to, finally consolidate around one plug eventually? Or is this, we gonna be, what's that look like?
It's a challenging question for a lot of the CPOs, and we're seeing them take sort of different approaches, right? The ones that you mentioned, these sort of, what I'll call the sort of the newer charging 2.0 players, the Walmarts, the Mercedes, the Ionnas, the BP Pulses, people like that, where they've sort of entered the industry in the last few years, and all of their, well, except for like obviously the Circle K Ionna locations and stuff, but all of their locations are basically sort of like greenfield, if you will, right? They're sort of new and stuff. And so they're going in and they have kind of these models of, maybe eight to 10, 350 or 400 kW chargers, right? Like they have this sort of whole model built out of size and everything and how they deploy. And most of them have gone 50-50 or like 40 NACS, 60% CCS connectors on these sort of 8, 10, 12 port stations and stuff. But then, you look at EVgo, and I listen in on the quarterly EVgo earnings presentation every quarter, and Bonner, the CEO there, has talked about, they've been, sort of slowly adding them. They're sort of testing it and stuff, and they're seeing adoption. But, he basically has admitted that, it's taking some time. And there's some big news that was announced today, the day that we're recording this, Jason. But there's this theory that I think is completely flawed by a lot of CPOs, which is if we add NACS connectors, we're going to get all these Tesla drivers coming to our station. And the reality is, having driven 3 Teslas in the past, I'm currently in a different brand, but there's more Tesla ports and chargers and everything, and it works seamlessly. And some people still have free charging and stuff. And like, why would you go to a non-Tesla charger if you're driving a Tesla? And the reality is, more people driving these new BEV models that have a NACS port built in are actually going to start migrating more to the Tesla supercharger, right? And once they experience it, or maybe they were former Tesla drivers, right? Yeah. And, they've got plug and charge, whatever, it just sort of works seamlessly. And they set up the app and the account and stuff. I think the industry has sort of been misguided that they're going to get all of these 4 to 5 million Tesla drivers to start coming to their stations. You'll get some, of course.
Sure.
But the reality is it's more the other way. And so I think the major players that we've talked about that are doing this, because they're new, they're targeting the new vehicles that are coming out with these, and hoping and crossing their fingers that they'll get a few Tesla drivers and stuff. But the smaller players and the other players, they're going to have a real tough time attracting Tesla drivers. And in the big news that came out this morning, Jason, was that EVgo, the third largest charging network in America, announced that they're going to partner with Tesla, and they're going to launch EVgo superchargers, which is the term. And funny enough, in the press release, they didn't mention Tesla supercharger for business, which is something that we'll probably talk about on this call. But so I don't know if they have like a separate partnership around it, and it's different from the standard Tesla supercharger for business program. But to me, that's like an earthquake in the industry. I look at the background with like the frequency. This is like, it's, to me, it's an earthquake, because we've seen smaller companies in Francis Energy adopt the Tesla supercharger for business. But EVgo, the third largest CPO in the country, now saying you do this. Why? Why are they doing this? Right. And the press release, and I'm going to actually post something on LinkedIn after this recording. There was a statement in the press release that it's we will show up in the in-car navigation of more than 4 million Teslas. And they said that's what this conversation is all about between today. That point, right?
Yes.
We'll talk more about this, about how what's driving success as a CPO. But that's what it comes down to,
Yes.
right? My wife and I are now, after 3 Teslas, we're driving an Audi Q6 e-tron. We have 1 year of charging with Electrify America. Guess what shows up on our navigation when we go on a road trip?
Is
Electrify
the EA
America
signs.
stations,
Yeah.
right? And there are millions of people, Hyundai Ioniq 5 drivers, et cetera, and maybe they no longer have the free charging, but guess who still shows up in their navigation?
That's
not
right.
EVgo, not Tesla, not Ionna, right? And that's why Ionna actually has a chance, because they have 8 automakers that will gradually make
Yes.
that happen, and discounts and partnerships they've already started to. But the reality is this is what I'm focused on, and the big issue is if you don't have those partnerships, and you don't have partnerships with Uber and Lyft for rideshare drivers like EVgo does, and some of the other players, right? That's foundational to success, right? Those drivers, some of them, when I go into, Uber or Lyft, I always, and it's electric, and they're driving electric, I always pester them with questions and stuff.
Same.
Some of them, the full-time drivers, some of them will charge 2 times, 3 times a day, 6 days a week.
Yes.
Think about that,
Yeah.
right? 15,
Yeah.
20 times potentially a week they might charge, right? For the full-time serious ones. You and I might charge on a road trip once every couple of months or something like that, right? So it's the key is understanding who your market is, how you attract them, and how you attract those high value, high frequency drivers, right? So you have that strong foundation of a business. I always relate to sort of the airline industry. I'm a loyal Delta flyer, have 1.4 million miles on Delta. Even though I live near San Francisco, which is a United hub, I switched to Delta, and I still fly them, and I will fly, with stops and connections instead of using another airline to go direct, because they take really good care to me. I'm loyal. I get rewards. I like their experience. And, that's one of the next phases I think of the charging industry is there's sort of the retail aspects that we've talked about that they're going to adopt. But I also think, there's going to be companies okay, we're the Delta, and others can say we're the Southwest, or they formerly Spirit, or whatever it is. So they're going to target different segments, but the rideshare drivers are kind of in a different way. They're kind of like the business travelers for like Delta and American and United and stuff. Is there's a small number of them compared to every American that flies to go somewhere. But when I used to fly a lot, sometimes I would fly 3 or 4 times a month, right? I would do 70 segments a year, 150,000 miles 1 year, right? That's, those are the people you want to take care of and attract, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of going in a sort of circle here, but that brings us back to the EVgo Tesla announcement kind of today. EVgo already had 25% of their throughput has been rideshare drivers, massive, right? Think about that. 1/4 of their business comes from a tiny customer segment of rideshare drivers, right? And but I think this new partnership with Tesla is kind of the other piece of this. Is okay, so how do we attract and retain customers? Well, it's all about being in the in-car navigation, because that's how most people determine where they're gonna stop, especially on road trips and stuff. So that's the next challenge and battle, right? Is how do we get inside the navigation, or how do we do these fleet or rideshare and other kind of partnerships with apartment complexes that don't have charging. So you have a fast charging station across the street, and you go to 200 unit apartment complex owner and you say, we'll do a partnership with you and give your apartment owners that drive EVs like a discount or preferred pricing it late at night or whatever it is. Like, this industry is going to have to start being really strategic, thoughtful, and creative about how they do one thing, which is attract, retain, and serve customers.
Yeah. Going back to your comments around EVgo's partnership with Tesla. Tesla Supercharger for Business is just one more example of Tesla as a disruptor in this industry and market mover, market influencer, market reshaper in this space. Because when Tesla Supercharger for Business was announced, of course, every manufacturer stood to attention because what is the impact of that?
Blank.
Yeah, exactly. Because every manufacturer is now thinking about what that impact is. And then, of course, CPOs. And so you mentioned third largest CPO in the US, EVgo is now made an announcement that that's a way that they're going to leverage. I know when Supercharger for Business was first announced, their sites were not appearing on the HMI of the Tesla units. That's now changed, I believe. now those third party sites show up.
I think it always was. I think because I think that's what was the key thing that attracted people to do it. But what's actually changed recently, and I'm guessing with this EVgo announcement, something is like might change again and stuff. But a couple months ago, they sort of rocked the world with an announcement that they did an update to the Tesla app where drivers could actually toggle a setting in the app that would not show the Tesla Supercharger for Business stations.
Just the
native.
That
freaked everybody out, right? Because wait a minute, that's the sole reason, the main reason we signed up for this program is you would bring us, millions of potential drivers and stuff.
Sure.
So, obviously, I don't have any insight into the EVgo Tesla contract and partnership, but I'm sure that would have been really concerning to them because that would be the whole reason you're doing it. The press release even said that, right? We're going to show up in the in-car navigation. So maybe they're softening that or rescinding that choice for consumers and stuff, but regardless, that's it's just huge, right? You think about, half or more of the EVs on the road in America are Teslas, right? And think about that, right? Like if you're like Suncoast Charging, which was the first CPO to basically become a business because of that program, right? Like they have double the market opportunity of drivers by being part of that. Double, right? Just think about that, right? And so it's massive. And so this I as I mentioned, I think today's announcement with EVgo is kind of an earthquake, right? Because we saw this sort of building, a lot of small regional guys, two guys in their kitchen, getting into the business, right? Because Tesla took care of so much of it. All we have to do is like design the logo to put on the Tesla Superchargers. I'm being a bit facetious.
Sure.
It's more involved than that.
Yeah.
And then Francis Energy, right, got into it. And that was like, wow, that was sort of like when Jim Farley got on Twitter with Elon Musk and said, we're going to adopt NACS, right? Like that was like, that changed the whole industry, right? And I think when Francis announced it, that was like, okay, it's not just two guys in their kitchen. This is like, a significant player adopting it. And, and they've already seen one of the executives already, sort of posted, I'm sure you saw it as well on LinkedIn about a month ago or so, that they ripped and replaced some of their same sites, right? And they saw a 5x utilization increase like overnight. Wow. And to me, that was, Jason, that was another one of these big points that I've been trying to shake the industry, right? Everybody talks so much about location and amenities and things like that, but here's an actual lab case, right? The location didn't change, the amenities didn't change, nothing changed. What changed was the Tesla hardware and 4 million people seeing the potential of all those Tesla drivers being your navigation. And overnight, they saw a 5x increase in utilization, right? And Yeah, it's just like, it's massive. And, to sort of put a bow on that, I'll be repeating myself. It's all about how you get those customers. And it starts with being in the in-car navigation.
Right. That's absolutely right. We think of in a traditional fueling environment, there's the big price sign that's out on the side of the road and it's high enough
That's
that people
probably
can
the
see it.
equivalent, right?
But
Is
this
the
is,
big sign.
yeah, it's now the sign in the vehicles and you just dropped
Great
it in there.
analogy.
You
Yeah,
just
yeah.
dropped a sign inside the
It's
HMI.
inside the car. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
inside the screen. That's absolutely right. And echoes of everything that you've just said. There are 3 episodes of Field Frequency that come to mind. One was Joe George with Cox Automotive. The other was John Eichberger with the Transportation Energy Institute. And then this week, an episode released by Omar Riadi with Percepta. And there was rhymes and echoes in all 3 of those episodes that really centered around retailers leveraging their availability into the screen, into the navigation, into the dashboard of the vehicle, and how do retailers leverage that? And that's an aggregation of all 3 of those episodes, and that's not each of those episodes stood alone, but to the point of the price sign now inside the car, and now you can just navigate to it was a theme, and yet now we've seen the 3rd largest CPO take that and literally leverage it. And what is that utilization going to look like? You mentioned some of the, the startups. You mentioned Suncoast. I know Dave Patrick of Suncoast, and we've got them on the short list, as well as some other businesses that are emerging CPOs that are leveraging a supercharger for business, and we've got them on the short list to come on Field Frequency and talk about their business and what they're going to be doing as an operator, leveraging that as maybe their principal solution. Maybe they don't have anything else but that. And I think it'll be interesting conversations. But amenities. Yeah, this is certainly pointing towards charging 3.0. You coined the term charging 2.0, but maybe what does charging 3.0 look like? Just paint with a broad brush there, Loren.
Yeah,
what do you see? What's that look like?
Yeah. To be candid, I haven't given charging 3.0 a lot of thought yet, but I think we've actually outlined a lot of it in our discussion so far, Jason, in that parts of it are this sort of this retail model, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of it's not just about the charging experience. It's about what I do when I'm there for 20, 30, 40 minutes or whatever for just talking about fast charging. And so then it becomes those who are going to win and be really successful know how to get people out of their car and inside the store, the convenience store, the Walmart, the Targets, whatever it is. And, you had John Eichenberger on from Travel Institute and NACS and stuff like that. And, that industry still hasn't figured it out. They're all working on it. They've been working on it for years. But that's sort of really the next thing is tying those loyalty and rewards programs. Because right now, if you go charge it, a Costco or whatever it is, right? It's like powered by Electrify America, even though it's the Costco network. You don't get the Electrify America free charging, right? But, you probably use your Electrify America app or whatever. It's just like, it's kind of a mess, right? But the reality is whatever, charge point management software system you use and network and stuff like that, it's in a separate sort of data platform and stuff like that. And it's not connected to the point of sale system and the loyalty and rewards program system inside the store, right? Like, this, you're an expert in sort of the fueling industry, right? Like when you pull into a gas station and, and swipe your card and everything, or no, actually when you don't swipe your card, but you put the gas in and then you go inside the store because you want to get, a 6-pack of Pepsi and a donut or whatever it is, right? You go up, they say, what pump did you fill at? Pump 6, right? It sees your transaction. And then if you're like in their reward program, like what's your mobile number, right? And then you add in your 6-pack of Pepsi and donut and you get your, I see that you have a certain number of points. You get $1 off today or we'll discount your charging or whatever. Like, solving that problem and creating it, that's going to be part of charging 3.0 is connecting the data on the customer and connecting their charging behavior and their purchase behavior inside the store and stuff. So that, or inside the restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're stopping off at a Subway or something like that, and you're a member of their like whatever it is, like connecting the charging data and who you are as a customer with your relationship with the site host, the retailer, et cetera. So I think that's one part of it. I think another part of it is what I've talked about with like the airline industry, right? Where they're going to be much more sophisticated on figuring out who their customers are that they want to serve and attract and retain, right? Like I'll come back to Delta again as an example. Delta has been the most profitable. I mean, it used to be Southwest, right? But Delta has become, award-winning, profitable. I think maybe they had a loss because of like jet fuel prices last quarter or whatever it was, right? But what did they do? They started upgrading their planes, right? And in the more first class seats, all this kind of stuff, because they're going after the business traveler, right? They're basically saying, yeah, we want the holiday traveler, but that's not what makes this company tick and be the best, we think, right, in the industry and and so profitable, right? Because we've identified a customer segment that is going to drive the customer, and I think we're going to see over time sort of a similar evolution in sort of this, charging 3.0 is that, we're going to probably see some players that are more in the old Southwest and maybe the may they rest in peace Spirit, and Frontier, like sort of that they're going to target people that I just want to roll in, sit in my car and play video games and machine and have the fastest, lowest price charging, right? I don't need a canopy. I don't need sushi, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be sort of this mix because you've used the word several times on this podcast today, Jason, of differentiation. And right now, nobody, not very many people in this industry are focused on that. It's been a build it and they will come, right? And so, the third piece of charging 3.0 is figuring out and designing your company and your processes and your ecosystem around who you're going to serve and serve better than anybody else, right? Yeah. And for some people, it's going to be price, right? There's always, every industry has people that say, we're going to win on price, right? Others are going to win on service. Others are going to win on amenities. Some might win on, we have, megawatt chargers, right? We're going to win on, you're in and out in 5 minutes, once cars catch up, can actually charge it, anything close to that, right? So I think over time of foundational aspect, and we're already seeing, like, you look at like a Revel, right? The New York based, and even BP Pulse to an extent, right? They're very focused on, airport, look at like rideshare things. That's Revels focuses on rideshare and fleet drivers and stuff. So I think that's sort of maybe one of the other pieces of this is there's going to be that I know where I'm going to stop and charge because they know me. They've designed their business to serve me, whatever segment I am, right? So I know that was a lot, but I think that those are some of the aspects of it.
Yeah, and if you'll let me add a fourth example to what charging 3.0 could look like is related to a thought around what happens in a traditional fueling environment where, and again, this don't really apply to a Buc-ee's or to a larger operator who has multiple fueling points, but this is the person that pulls up and they're fueling at the gas pump, and then they needed a receipt for whatever reason, and the receipt didn't print out. So then they go inside the store. There is someone to help them, and
a human being.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is where I'm going with this is as it relates to ChargeMate. And we'll talk about who they are.
I thought that's what you were going, because that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, all these unattended sites don't have help. And so sometimes, an EV driver pulls up to a site, they can't use the charger for whatever reason. Maybe there's not an option for them distance-wise, just go somewhere else. And so, we've had Brad Chris from ChargeMate on Field Frequency, and you recently became a business advisor and investor in ChargeMate. And ChargeMate is a AI-powered chat and voice support platform for EV drivers. If you pull up and there's something wrong with the transaction. There's something wrong that's happening in that moment.
They're the human.
Yeah, and so we've had Brad on, but I'd like to hear your comments, because I feel like that's an example of the CPOs that leverage a solution like ChargeMate. I feel like that's a differentiation, because they've got a resource for help, especially for a new EV driver that doesn't understand adapters and hey, I plugged in and I was getting a lot of energy. Now I'm not. Something's wrong. No, nothing's wrong. That type of thing.
Yeah.
And so, what was some compelling, things that drew you to become an investor and an advisor to ChargeMate?
A lot of it is everything you just talked about, right? And the fact that, unlike the gas station convenience store, well, there is no human there. Like, people are stuck. It's like you're on an island and there's nobody to help you. And, even for experienced EV drivers like me and you, we still run into problems. I mean, the first time we took our Audi to an Electrify America, I had all sorts of problems. They turned out to be like I was the problem. Then my wife and I both set up with separate logins and passwords on the Audi, my Audi app. And apparently that canceled plug-in charge, right? You can't have two accounts on the same car or something like that. But, the dealer, but it's like, so I ended up eventually, after going to 3 different chargers and everything, I just whipped out my credit card and did tap and pay, and it worked, right? But my point is that charging is complicated, and not just for newbies, but for everybody. And especially if maybe you're going to a new CPO or something like that. There's always things can go wrong. And, as we've talked at length on this call, right? It's like so much of it is about creating a great customer experience. And one of the things that Brad talks about, which just totally resonated with me, is sort of like the hidden failures, right? Like, as there's all this data with the charge point management system, and there's, the hardware and the software, and there's all this data around what was the reason for a failure and stuff. But, a big part of what ChargeMate is solving is stuff that doesn't show up in that data, right? It's like I pulled up and, screen was cracked, or, my connector, my adapter. Like, one of the things we're seeing a lot of is just like the connector gets stuck in the car and they're like, I can't get it out, right? Like, that's like 5 to 10% of the problems that we're seeing, right? A lot of app problems, right? Like, the app doesn't work, whatever it is. Like, there's just all these sort of things that never allow the EV driver to get to a charge, a successful charge, right? And so a lot of it is like recovering lost revenue and turning those drivers into lifetime loyal customers, right? Like, this, it's like, and I was talking to somebody last night over a couple of beers about this, is there's this interesting human phenomenon. Like, we'll go somewhere and we'll have a bad experience, but if the business solves it and turns you around, you're like, I started off really happy, I hated this place, but oh my God, they came in and solved it, and maybe they even gave me free dessert or whatever it is, right? Like, and then you're like, I'm hooked, I'm in for life. Like, these guys, this company, like this organization, like, saved me. They threw a life raft and pulled me in, and now I'm like, I'm with you guys, right? Yeah. And that's a key of what ChargeMate does, right? Is they take these people who are like on the ledge, right? Like, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere and I can't charge my, the app doesn't work, my cable's stuck.
Yeah.
I can't read the screen, like my credit card's not working, like whatever it is. And via chat or voice, right, they can solve like 90+% of those problems. And so, I was attracted to that opportunity, that they're honing in on a significant piece that's between, the CPO and the charging network and the software and the driver and the vehicle, right? Yeah. And bring this all together and creating a successful charging session. But what really got me excited, Jason, was that's just the starting point, right? Like once you're in there and have this communication channels, one of the things Brad and I talk a lot about is like the voice of the customer. So, to your point, unlike a gas station, there's nobody to talk to, right? And now here you have somebody that will listen to you, somebody you can talk to. One of the things we're seeing, which is really, really fascinating, right, is people will actually chat or call ChargeMate and say, the bathroom's out of toilet paper, the trash cans are overflowing, there's no water in the squeegee, window, like the screen's cracked. There were a lot of people icing the charging station, right? Like nobody would pick up the phone or, press the call center button and wait 5 minutes for the call center rep to answer to tell them that, there's the trash can is overflowing, but they will do it with like this AI vehicle. And it's another sort of fascinating human behavior thing. Yeah. But, where this starts to go is something you talked about earlier is now, longer term, we can turn that into, not just reactive communication, but proactive. Like Jason, we're seeing that, your charging session is authenticated and charging. If you're thirsty, as a loyal, charge point operator X, brand X, we're offering $1 off coffee. If you go inside the store, like, there's opportunity to sort of start to be proactive and connect the dots.
Yes.
And so really and there's a lot of other like marketing and revenue and loyalty things that we're talking about. Once you're in the middle there between like the customer and these other operators, of start to being that sort of glue and communicate with the customer. And then the last thing is just that we can take this concept to other industries and verticals and other assets and stuff like that. So, as a startup has to focus on one thing first and nail that, right? And so that's what ChargeMate and I'm helping them with is let's nail this first sort of charge point operator solution and stuff, and then we can expand further within them and then beyond them. So it's really exciting. And at the end of the day, it's AI. Who wouldn't be, somebody at my age wouldn't want to be involved in AI.
Right. Well, your comments around voice of the customer and the importance of that, to the earlier example that you made where there's a problem and you as a customer have one foot out the door, but then they hear you and they respond and then they retain you. I just so many examples come to my mind when I think about that. But I think, charging 3.0 is taking solutions like ChargeMate and creating that experience because you're ingesting that voice of the customer that does report, that will report on the trash cans overflowing and all of that. Whereas they're not going to call support to report that because support can't do anything and won't do anything with it. They're there to support the charger, not necessarily that. But that's another layer of differentiation that solutions like ChargeMate offer and then can bring to market for the CPOs. I think, I think of businesses or places just, I don't want to say the logo in mind. They're a private business, but I go there because I know the wings are going to be great. But when I go in there, I'm going there with the understanding that the service is going to suck. That the service, the staff doesn't care. They don't care if you're there or not. They've got plenty of legacy business. They've been around for years, family-owned business. They don't care. It's not quite like Dick's Last Resort.
They're the wing Nazi. They're the wing Nazi, not the soup Nazi, right? Like, they treat you poorly, but you go there for the wings. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then on the other side of that example are the businesses where I go to where maybe the food is okay or the service. Everything's okay, but the experience, they know how to delight the customer. And so they retain the customer.
You're overlooking like the beach or the water or whatever it is, right? There's something else going on. That's why you go there. Yeah.
And I feel like those examples are all about, where the CPO has got to find. You made the example of the guy that pulls up and he's just going to play on his phone and he doesn't care about the canopy. He just cares about the price per kilowatt and then he's on down the road.
Yeah.
And so, that just, I think when we zoom out and we look at it at the industry as a macro level, that just speaks of all the diversity and space for opportunity for different brands. But I think the brands have to differentiate themselves. They have to have something, a compelling message, a compelling solution, a compelling product, a compelling experience to attract and then retain the customer. But then there are others that can just operate in that space because they have good wings. So you just put up with everything else.
Yeah.
Well, Loren, this has been a great conversation. How did we get past the 60-minute mark already? This just flew by so quickly.
No, but it was great. And as we knew, we only got to like 1/8 of the questions that we'd come up with in advance and stuff. But but I loved how we just sort of rolled and pivoted with it and brought up press releases of came out an hour ago, all sorts of things and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think what was great, Jason, is just that, we focused a lot on this sort of this next phase is it's all about the driver and the customer and that customer experience and marketing and service and how you attract and retain them. And we're going to see a variety of different models, as you just said, and we just discussed and stuff. But right now, I think this industry is, with a few exceptions, is still in the, build it and they will come and we hope they show up. And, that's what's really driving me right now is I've been looking at the data and they're not showing up at a lot of these places. Right. And so that's sort of this next phase is how do we sort of shape the industry to realize that, before you can ever get to charging 3.0, you got to get to charging 2.0, right? You've got to focus on not just putting the chargers in the ground, but, how do you get people there and serve them well?
Yeah. And then get them to come back. Absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we will include links to your LinkedIn, to Chargeonomics, and everything we discussed in the show notes. For those listening, if you found this conversation valuable, please follow the Field Frequency podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. Loren, thank you for coming on Field Frequency. It was a pleasure to have you. Look forward to your return visit and for you to come back and share some more perspectives. But thanks for being
great. Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, AUTOZY.co.